Well, Mat Staver, appreciate you taking the time and coming on with us today. There's a lot to break down. Obviously, the Supreme Court's recent decision not to reconsider Obergefell or to take up Kim Davis's appeal. Kim Davis is your client. What was your reaction to this decision?
Well, it was certainly disheartening that the Supreme Court decided to sidestep this critically important issue. The Kim Davis case has been going on, as you know, for 10 years, since 2015, when 5 lawyers, that's the Chief Justice's term, invented the so-called right to same-sex marriage, and Kim Davis was the first victim, spending 6 days in prison. And then eventually now she faces these fines against her personally of $360,000 plus. So the case has compelling facts, not only because she lost her freedom, she faces financial judgment that could bankrupt her, but also because she got the religious accommodation that she asked for in 3 different forms. She got it from a Democratic governor in September of 2015 when he said it's okay to strike through her name. And she got it from a Republican governor who was elected on this very issue by executive order in December of 2015. And then she got the accommodation by a unanimously passed law in the legislature in April of 2016. So the facts of the case were very compelling. 3 of the justices, including the chief, have already clearly indicated that Obergefell was wrongly decided. This was the case to actually take to overturn that wrongly decided opinion, but they chose not to do so for whatever reason. We don't know.
Well, can you explain, obviously you just mentioned a number of important issues here, but in your perspective and view, what legal precedent does this set for government officials who might be acting based on sincerely held religious beliefs?
Well, denial of a case for review by the Supreme Court does not set a specific legal precedent because you don't know the reason, and they only accept about 1% of the cases every year. They only accept about 60 to 70 cases for review, and there's about 8,000 to 9,000 that are requested every year. So you don't know the reason. So from a Supreme Court standpoint, there's no national precedent. However, from the Court of Appeals standpoint that governs Kentucky and Ohio and those surrounding areas, it does set a precedent. And this precedent is that when an official like Kim Davis asks for a religious accommodation, they're kind of on an island by themselves where they don't have any First Amendment protection. And that is a real concerning issue. That is one of the compelling reasons why the High Court should have taken this case. Now, we do have something that happened just about 2 weeks before the Supreme Court decided not to take this case, and that is the Texas Supreme Court unanimously, 9-0, actually amended their Code of Judicial Conduct, saying that judges could opt out of performing same-sex ceremonies for religious reasons when they have a religious objection. And they said specifically that the First Amendment predates Obergefell, and Obergefell can't change their established religious freedom rights. So we do have some movement taking place, but what we need is more challenges. And I can say this, it's not a matter of if Obergefell will be overturned, it's just a matter of when. We will not stop until Obergefell is overturned. It is on shaky ground, more so than even Roe versus Wade that was overturned by Dobbs in 2022. Obergefell will fall. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Can you explain a little bit more that shaky ground? Because this is the debate that people are having, right? One side says shaky ground, the other side says no, this is, very solid ground. Explain that so people can understand.
Well, there's 2 areas. Number one, the Supreme Court's already questioned this so-called substantive due process, which is not in the Constitution. Due process is, that is, you have a right to be notified of the charge against you. You have a right to defend yourself. That's due process. Substantive due process is a judge-made rule that the Supreme Court did in the activist decade of the 70s and 80s. And it really means nothing other than the judges create their own idea when there's something they want to put into their opinion that is not supported by the Constitution. But they've limited it by saying, if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, which obviously marriage in general, and same-sex marriage in particular, is not enumerated, neither is abortion, then you have to look at, is it deeply rooted in our history so that we have to protect it? And if we don't protect this deeply rooted concept that is part of our history, that the concept of ordered liberty will literally come unraveled. Well, marriage is not, in the Constitution, it's not enumerated. So you have to ask the question, is same-sex marriage, which is the issue here, deeply rooted in our history? The answer is obviously no. It's been criminalized, sodomy, for most of our history, and certainly same-sex marriage has never been recognized except when the Supreme Court did so. So they didn't even follow the substantive due process, which there are efforts by justices to simply abandon that. It just simply went further than this weak ground of substantive due process. It went further to the point where it just invented it. And that was the Chief Justice's reason for calling them 5 lawyers. He said they didn't even follow the substantive due process precedent. They just invented it out of thin air. And he said 5 lawyers imposed their opinion, not a legal judgment. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. Even former retired Justice Stevens, a liberal justice, wrote in a law review article recently saying, if you follow the Supreme Court's so-called substantive due process, you would not have a Obergefell. It doesn't qualify. So there is no basis whatsoever in any stretch of the imagination to support same-sex marriage in the Constitution or in this case. So it will fall. It's just a matter of which case, which person, which set of facts will ultimately get to the Supreme Court at the right time to get enough votes to overturn a Obergefell. It will happen.
So let me ask you this, because some of the other things that critics will argue, they'll say, well, government employees, they have to enforce the law regardless of their personal beliefs. How do you respond when you hear objections like that in light of Davis's case?
Well, you don't lose your constitutional protection when you become an elected official. You have that constitutional protection no matter what. And in fact, the Constitution doesn't make a distinction between you having the right to free exercise of religion as an individual or you having a right to free exercise of religion as an elected official. You still have the right to free exercise of religion. The question is, can it be accommodated? And the answer in this case is clearly yes. Why? Because we've got 3 different examples of it. She was sued in the middle of July 2015. By the first week of September, while she was in prison for 6 days, a deputy clerk issued the license, struck through her name manually. The other side, the plaintiffs in this case, were upset. They didn't want a license without her name. They wanted her name on it. So they went back to the court and they asked the court to hold her in contempt. Well, she didn't strike through the name. That's what she asked for. That's what she was asking for accommodation. A deputy clerk did it. Well, the governor, Bashir, who originally did not respond to her request for accommodation, said that's okay. It's still valid, even with her name struck through. So that was the first accommodation within 2 months when this case began, actually 6 weeks. Then she got the accommodation again by executive order because of religion, and that's what the executive order clearly articulates. And then a unanimously passed legislature gave the accommodation. And then, of course, you have just a few weeks ago, the Texas Supreme Court unanimously saying, yes, you can accommodate judges too. You can't force them who are elected to participate in something that's objectionable based upon their religion with regards to same-sex marriage. So yes, you have a constitutional right to free exercise of religion. And yes, in this case, it's very simple and easy to work out an accommodation for people who have religious objections.
You know, one of the other questions people will have about this, and would love to get your take, obviously same-sex marriage was essentially codified into federal law. You had the Respect for Marriage Act. You had, a number of other efforts. What legal path do you see? Help people understand, the ultimate overturning of Obergefell. What does that look like in your perspective?
Well, the interesting thing is that some of the LGBTQ advocates, they wanted to pass the Respect for Marriage Act, and they did that in December a couple of years ago. The fact is, by passing that law, they actually helped our case, because that would have been, without that particular law in place, one of the big arguments for not overturning the Obergefell, because they could say, okay, we made a mistake, it was wrongly decided, but now if we overturn it, what are we going to do? We're going to mess up all these different rights, custody, visitation, property distribution that have come into being over the past decade or so. But that argument is taken away by the Respect for Marriage Act, because what that law does, the federal law says, is that whatever marriage license you have, say, for example, a Obergefell is overturned, you still have that same legal protection going forward. So that license is essentially grandfathered in. It's not going to be affected. But states can go back to where they were. They have the right to either adopt same-sex marriage, just like in the post-abortion decision. They can address the abortion issue in their states. But they can also have the right to say, no, we're going back to the way we were on June 25, the day before Obergefell 2015. And in fact, 30 plus states have state constitutional marriage amendments that say very clearly marriage is the union of a man and woman. They're still in the state constitutions. So the day after Obergefell is overturned, those states will automatically revert, along with many others that are in the statutes, to one man and one woman. Those that have licenses, they'll still be protected going forward until they end for one reason or another. And then the states will get into the battle of, do they want to continue with one man and one woman, or do they want to adopt, say, what California or New York has done, and that is go down the road of same-sex marriage? It'll be a battle going back to the states. And frankly, before June 26, the issue of marriage and domestic disputes, domestic law, has always been a state matter. It's never been a federal issue. The Supreme Court federalized it wrongly, and now it needs to reverse its decision.
So, final question on Kim Davis. Where do things stand for her now? Is her battle over? Where does she go next?
Her battle's not over, because now they move to the final phase, and that is the collection process. So we're going to be working with Kim Davis and others with regards to what, if any, assets she has. Frankly, she doesn't have any real assets, but that's going to have to be considered going forward. They're asking for $360,000, but that was before the appeal, so that amount probably would be higher. But at the end of the day, you can't get blood out of a turnip. And so we're going to have to go through her assets, her holdings, which are very minimal, by the way, anyway. And they may not end up with anything if she doesn't have any assets to actually satisfy the judgment, but that's yet to be determined.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time and breaking this down. It's an important story, lots of ins and outs, but it sounds like it is nowhere near over.
No, it's definitely nowhere near over for Kim Davis, and it's certainly not over for overturning Obergefell.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining the Christian Post today.
Thank you. My pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more Christ-centered journalism.